Alright, so out of the gate, I'm gonna just say it, is out of the box, sharpness is the most overrated aspect of buying a knife. So I know that's going to upset a lot of people, but before you guys, leave me a hate comment, hear me out. If you guys scroll through my comments section of any of my videos, you'll find two questions that will always pop up. The first being, what is the best knife? And the second question is, what is the sharpest knife? So even though for me, sharpness is important, which I'll get to why it's important in very specific scenarios, it's not for me the most important aspect of buying a knife. The most important aspect is ergonomics and fit and finish, the knife maker, the heat treatment of the knife, and the grind. And then sharpness is at the very end. And the reason I have these factors in this order is because it goes essentially from the least changeable to the most changeable. The ergonomics of a knife is virtually unchangeable when you buy it, versus the sharpness of a knife, you can basically sharpen it to whatever sharpness you want. So that's why I have them in that order. Now understand that everything I'm saying in this video is very subjective. Things like ergonomics, because my hands are not the largest hands in the world. I don't have very, beefy hands. My hands are bony and relatively small. So a person with larger, meaty hands may feel very differently about a knife such as the Kramer. Now, whenever I feature that knife in a video, a lot of folks would reach out and express very similar feelings about that knife. They feel the edge is great, they feel the profile is very nice, but the handle is just a bit too bulbous, it's a bit too round for folks with smaller bony hands. And so even though that knife overall is a very good package, folks with smaller hands won't find that knife very comfortable because it is so wide of a handle. And then on the opposite spectrum, I find the octagonal and D-shaped handles for me are much more comfortable to use because of their size. Generally speaking, knives with octagonal handles and D-shaped handles, they tend to be on the thinner, more narrow end. And so inevitably, someone with my sort of hand shape will tend to gravitate towards those handles instead. And so you have to understand that ergonomics is very subjective. If you are a line cook and you work in a restaurant, you're holding a knife for 10, 12, 14 hours a day, so you've got to have a knife that is very comfortable. Ergonomics is virtually unchangeable. It's not something you can grind away or sand down and like fit and finish. Ergonomics of a knife, if it's uncomfortable out of the box, it's going to be uncomfortable for the long term. So for me, it's a deal breaker if a knife is not comfortable out of the box. The second most important factor for me when it comes to buying a knife is fit and finish. You can do a lot to the fit and finish of a knife. Now, things like rivets and the tightness of how the blade sits in the handle, that's a bit more complicated and requires a bit more time, but most of us won't really have to deal with that. It really comes down to things like the fit and finish of the choil, the spine, and the handle. All those areas you can sand down fairly easily with some 400, 600 grit sandpaper, and you can finish it off with some 1000, 2000 grit sandpaper, and you can have a knife that looks pretty much like new again. And for me, fit and finish is quite important because areas such as the spine and choil, I touch a lot because I sharpen all of my knives by hand. If you don't sharpen your knives by hand, you still are going to be using that knife, and so it may not affect you as much because I am putting a bit more pressure on those areas when sharpening. And so for someone from my perspective, it's actually interesting to see that a lot of folks will tend to rank sharpness out of the box higher than fit and finish. Now, when I say knife makers, there's a pretty big difference between an artisan and a knife factory. So, you have your larger brands such as your Yaxels, your M. Custa Zenmais, your Miyabis. Those are the larger factories in Japan. And they have knives ranging from, let's say, $75, $80, all the way up to $400, $500. So they have a very wide range of prices for 8-inch chef knives. You go to an artisan maker, your Moritakas, your Sugimotos, Yu Kurosaki, Anryu, Tanaka. They will have maybe 3 or 4 steels at the most, typically 2 to 3 steels to choose from. And all their 8-inch chef knives, whether it's Origami Super, White number 2, Blue number 2, VG10, they all will be in a very similar price range. There may be 5 or 10% difference between the different steels, but they're all relatively close. And the fit and finish between them are all generally very close as well. But the more important thing is to know the difference that when you buy a knife from an artisan, you're going to have a very similar experience, user experience between the different steels and the different price points of an artisan versus a larger factory, which can produce a knife for as low as, like I said, $50 to $80 to as high as $500. And so you just have to understand that the differences in quality of knives will vary greater when it comes to a larger factory. Now, between heat treatment and grind, I find that heat treatment is more important but harder to detect. For example, when you buy a knife, there is no way for you to actually know how high that heat treatment is and to know how reliable that treatment is until you actually buy the knife and use it. And so when you're buying a knife that, let's say, has a heat treatment of 61, 62 Rockwell, generally speaking, I find that knives in that range will have at least 1 to 2 months of edge retention before I feel like it needs to be sharpened. When you buy a knife that has a heat treatment of 55 to 57, I generally find that it has 1 or 2 weeks before the knife needs to be touched up on the whetstone. As a side note, I get this comment a lot, is that people ask me, are all heat treatment the same? Are all knives that are heat treated for 61 are all going to be performing the same? The answer is no. I have purchased many knives on Amazon that have advertised the heat treatment of 62 to 63, and I've purchased many knives from Japan that have a heat treatment of 60 to 61, and I will say that 9 times out of 10, the knives that are made in Japan have a better edge retention than the knives made in China, even though they technically are advertising their knives with a higher heat treatment. And so you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt, as maybe just the knives that I'm using. Now, the knife's grind is really what makes up its overall geometry. So the knife grind is when you hold the knife up with the heel facing you or the handle facing you, not the opposite way, okay? So you hold the handle up and you look at the knife, and from there you can tell if it's an asymmetrical grind, a scanty grind, a hollow grind, a flat grind. From my experience, the overall grind of a knife is a better determining factor in terms of the knife's overall performance than the absolute sharpness out of the box or the edge performance by itself. So even though the knife's grind is an important factor, the grind can also be changed. So that's why, to me, it's not a deal breaker if a grind is not perfect for me. It's kind of like edge sharpness. It's not a deal breaker. You can always make your knives sharper by sharpening it, and you can also change your knife's overall profile by changing the grind. Whether you want a flat grind or a hollow grind to make it thinner at the cutting edge, there are many things you can do to change the overall cutting characteristics of a knife. In case you don't realize this, whether you buy a $30 knife, a $100 knife, or a $300 knife, or even a $3,000 knife, if you use it, you will have to sharpen it at some point. So a lot of folks will reach out and say, hey, I just purchased a $200 Shun, it's dull, aren't all Japanese knives supposed to stay sharp forever? Or I'll get a comment from someone who is a Victorinox user. They'll say, hey, my $30 Victorinox, I've been using it for 10 years. I've never had to sharpen it. Yeah. So I literally get people from both ends of the spectrum saying that their knives should never need sharpening. Now, I will say it's not something that you should write off, because there are times, such as when you're buying a Yanagiba or a single bevel knife, sharpening those knives require a bit more time. They're actually technically easier to sharpen, but they require more time to sharpen if you have a knife that's not very sharp. And so I will say, there are certain times when you buy a knife, such as a $200, $300 Yanagiba, you want it to be sharp and stay sharp longer. However, that is a very small portion of the population, and people who are buying those knives, generally speaking, know how to sharpen their knives anyways, or are willing to learn fairly quickly. But for the most of us, when you're buying a knife, don't be so offended if it doesn't come out of the box absolutely as sharp as you've seen it on a video on YouTube. So one of the comments I get from a lot of folks, and I'm just going to assume that they are new to knife sharpening or new to Japanese knives, they'll say, hey, I just bought this knife that you recommended. It's not cutting paper the way you cut on your videos. What's wrong with the knife? And I do respond to a lot of those questions. I generally just ask a question, have you used it in the kitchen? How does it feel on an ingredient? And shockingly, a lot of them write back and say, I haven't used it in the kitchen yet. I want to do the paper cut test like the way you do on your videos. When I do my paper cut test in my videos, it's to show the cleanness of an edge after I sharpen it. That's testing edge sharpness, not cutting performance on real ingredients. Two very separate things, and I always try to make that distinction in my videos. It's really for entertainment for myself and for you guys to see how crisp of an edge I can get off the whetstone, but we're not cutting real ingredients, and so a lot of folks take my cut test of paper and kind of replicate it in their personal lives, and sometimes they get disappointed. Cutting paper should never be your first test when buying a new knife. And for those who are curious, I'll leave a link in the video description or to a card right over here that will lead you to my top 5 knives I've used up to date. So back to the original statement. Do you agree or disagree with me that edge sharpness out of the box is overrated? And of course, do you agree or disagree with any of the points I've brought up in this video? And if you disagree, it's all good. We can all agree to disagree. Just let me know what your thoughts are. If I had to boil everything down to 1 or 2 points of simplifying knife purchases. So with all other factors being equal or setting them all aside, if you have a knife that is comfortable to hold and has good heat treatment, that is the formula for the perfect knife for yourself. All right. Oh. Okay. It could have midair. Oh. All right, we got a small piece. Oh. Yay! We did it! All right, there you go, John. It's done. I'm guessing most knives out of the box can probably do that. Can't say for sure, but I'm guessing most knives could. So that was only stropping for 20-30 seconds on a regular. This is a raw equine strop, but any strop will do. But yeah, all it does is cleans your knife up and makes it a little bit crisper on the cutting edge. And yeah, your knife can do that. Okay. Whoa, there you go. Oh, I decapitated the little boy. That's not nice. Just another silly cut test on YouTube. Anyone can do it.